Jay. Welcome to Mvskoke Radio, your weekly source for tribal and community news, interesting guests and discussions, plus a local events calendar. SJ, Stongo, Gary Fife, Jaho Jifkidus. What I got here? Mvskoke Radio, we have a couple things to be sharing with you today. Thank you for being here, listening to our show. We have a gentleman we're going to be talking to about a voting rights situation on one of the reservations in Oklahoma. I believe it's in the Southwest. He's got some things where people are trying to make it harder for that tribal members to vote. And with all the controversy going on around the nation, we thought that was most appropriate. In our second segment, recorded segment, we attended the Law and Order Conference roundtable and in Tulsa with Tulsa Deputy Police Chief, our own Deputy Attorney General, Mr. Trent Shores, District Attorney, and Kunzweiler, who's also a legal resource person up there, and they're talking about how they're going to be conducting enforcement of the laws now that a good chunk of Oklahoma has been tagged as reservation land. What will work, what won't, and then explain how they're going to be handling some boots on the ground kind of thing. But first of all, let's get on to our discussion. Mr. Siemens, are you with me?
Yeah, I am, Gary. Honey Wash Day. Good morning.
Okay. Let me play with some switches and get things taken care of. Here we go. Now we have a lot of attention being paid to voting rights, voting procedures and things like that around the nation. A very hot topic. People are really speaking up about it and making their voices known and how they want things to happen. Now, we have a situation that you've been following that directly pertains to this sort of thing. So why don't we let you explain what you've been watching there?
Sure. Excuse me. Basically, what is happening, and it's happening in Arizona on the Navajo Indian Reservation. We have some tribal members that are requesting the Secretary of State change the time allotted for tribal members on the reservation to cast their ballot. Currently, the way it is being handled is that you're actually in Arizona given 27 days to request and cast your ballot, which sounds like a long time to do something. But if you live in Scottsdale and you want to request a ballot to vote by mail, by the time you do a round trip, you get your ballot and you do your ballot and you send it in. It takes you 2 days. Plenty of time. But if you're a native on a reservation, first of all, you got to try to get to the post office because the roads out there aren't as great as they are in Scottsdale, Arizona. Then you get to the post office and you mail off your request. And then it takes anywhere from 5 to 6 days, depending where you're at, for it to get to the county recorder's office. And then it takes another 5 or 6 days to get back to you. Now, and that means during that time you got to drive from wherever you're at on these roads to the post office and check. But basically what it comes down to is that the non-Indians that live off reservation are actually given 25 days to vote, whereas if you're a native living on a reservation, you're given 12 to 15 days to vote, depending on the mail service. And so what they're saying is what they want the Secretary of State to do is to change how they collect ballots, because right now you have to have your mail-in ballot to the county recorder or to a polling place by 7 p.m. on Election Day. And if it's in the mail, and especially what's going on with the post office now, we don't know, if anything's going to be closed, moved, or less post offices. So it's even more important that they be allowed more time for their vote to be counted. And so what they're asking the Secretary of State is to allow the ballot, as long as it's postmarked and dated on the day of the election, to allow 10 days for that ballot to get to the county recorder's office in order for their vote to be counted. It's real simple. They do it in Alaska, and it's at no extra cost to the state. I mean, just by taking a little bit more time, allowing people to cast their ballot, and for it to be counted 10 days after the election, is not going to cost the state or the Secretary's office or the county recorders any extra money. So it's just a common sense request by the tribal members on a Navajo reservation.
Now, does this sound like it's applicable to other reservations around the nation? I mean, a lot of our population do live in rural areas on reservations from coast to coast and face a similar kind of circumstances, weather, distance, condition of the roads. Is that kind of a blanket discussion possible there?
Oh, it is more than possible. I think tribes need to look to see what the requirements are, and at a minimum request something like 10 days for those ballots to get in, as long as they're postmarked on Election Day. We're looking at a mail system that is not equal on reservations to those off reservations. Let's go back to the Navajo Nation, for instance. On the Navajo Nation, the size of the Navajo Nation is about the same size of West Virginia. Okay, in West Virginia, they have 800 plus post offices. On the Navajo Nation, they have almost 45. And so you can see the difference. I mean, I live on the Rosebud Sioux Reservation in South Dakota. There is no such thing as overnight mail. If you ask for that, they laugh at you, and you're not going to get it. So this is something that all tribes that are looking where they're forced to vote by mail, that they need to reach out to the Secretary of State and ask the Secretary of State to extend it, especially during this pandemic. I mean, we want it to continue for, this day forward and whatnot, but even doing it for the pandemic is just the right thing to do. And again, it's not asking for anything outrageous. Common sense tells you this is the right thing to do during this election time, during this pandemic.
Now, we've seen pictures of postal trucks that had a bed full of mailboxes, the blue familiar mailboxes, and complaints in the news from postal workers who say their sorting machines have been dismantled and taken out. Are we seeing anything comparable like that to this particular case?
Well, no, because on the reservation there's no processing center, so basically what they are is kind of like contract post offices, where they just put things and then they send them to like Phoenix, which is a processing center, and different places like that. So right now there isn't, but I can tell you what happened is we were trying to figure out the exact days that it took to mail a letter. And in one community that we went to, the post office was closed because the worker there had the COVID virus. So they had another location that was secondary that people could use. So we went there, and that was closed because the person that was working there also had the virus. I mean, so this is a real-life situation in which, we saw post offices closed because of the pandemic. And again, it just goes back to being reasonable and a smart thing to do.
It sounds familiar. I've got kinfolk who live in rural areas around here, and then friends who live on reservations up north and around the east. And it sounds like the situation that most of the country may be facing now with the cutback in postal services is something that we've been living with for decades. Would you see it that way?
Well, yeah. What I see going on with the Postal Service now is they're trying to Indianize them.
Oh boy, yeah. Now here, equality isn't always what it seems. Is not always what it's cracked up to be. Now, have the tribe, the Navajo, been able to take any actions or gain the support they need to help deal with the problem?
Well, I want to make this real clear. It's the Navajo Nation's citizens or tribal members that have filed this. I think that the Secretary of State is going to, well, I hope she does. I mean, again, it's common sense that she looks at the request and says, we need to do this. It's just the right thing to do.
You mentioned, of course, you're living on the Lakota reservation. What's the situation there?
Oh, we're like most places. We still have social distancing. Our tribal office is still closed. It will be closed until August 31st. You cannot go into any type of store, gas station within a reservation without having a mask. If you don't have one, you won't be allowed into the store. We're taking all the precaution. As you know, Indian country, we already have the pre-medical conditions that the COVID virus attacks, and so we have to be very careful and cautious to ensure that we don't lose our tribal members and especially our elders. So we have everything in place yet on the reservation.
All right, that's good news to hear that the tribe is taking these steps to protect its people. What have you heard in terms of feedback about any voting difficulties from folks either there or on Navajo?
Well, there's a big push for going all vote by mail. And to me, that is dangerous right now for Indian country because, again, we don't have the same type of postal system that people off reservations have. And so really this letter to the Secretary of State from the tribal members is kind of like a test. If we're going to go vote by mail, let's make sure that the First Americans have the same type of access to the postal system that the non-Indians have. And the other thing, like in South Dakota, if you want to vote by mail, you have to request an application, and on that application, you have to find a notary, have it notarized in order to vote by mail. So, I mean, there are a lot of obstacles that will really affect Indian country if they go totally vote by mail. So what we're looking at now is looking at the systems throughout the United States and Indian country to see whether or not the postal system would actually work in Indian country, or make suggestions as far as given extended days as far as ballots arriving and stuff like that.
The whole thing sounds like they they need to go back to the Pony Express to get something done.
Well, Pony Express didn't do very well in Sioux Country.
No, I understand they were getting a little extra speed notification here.
Yeah, they did get a little more incentive to hurry up.
A little pointed incentive there. The other reservations around the country are, as we say, in similar situations. So have you heard anything from anyone else about what they may be doing to alleviate the problems they're facing?
You know, a lot of tribes, especially the Nevada tribes, they actually work in conjunction with each other, ensuring that requests for satellite offices are being made properly, helping with applications and whatnot. And so if there is a problem and we get a call, we will look into it. But right now, everything is just so new that we're still trying to figure it out. And, you know, one of the things, that has to do with voting, and it is the census. And with taking 30 days away from the census, the undercount in any country is going to be so bad. And the census is used for your districting, redistricting for your, your school board, your county commission, your congressional people. And so by not paying attention to the census, and again, it goes back to the post office, because you won't get a questionnaire if you have a post office box. 2020 is really going to be hard on Native Americans throughout the United States, just on these issues alone. The census, the Postal Service, it's like it's a direct attack against, Native people, because we don't have the same or equal access to what other people have.
Right, and so we had tons of problems with the system to begin with, and this latest situation isn't helping any.
No, it's actually probably, going to be marked down in history somewhere how devastating it was to Indian country, not just with the deaths, but with the overall undercount and the pushing us to vote by mail and not giving us the proper time to do so. I mean, they make it very hard for Native Americans to participate in this electoral process, and doesn't mean we're not going to do it. I think our numbers are going to come out stronger than ever, but it's just the fact that it shouldn't be so hard to do it.
Have you experienced a situation or talked to people who have decided they want their vote to count and have opted to go to the polling places and saying, well, we know we can rely on this getting done, at least our part of it. Is that the general discussion, the mood in what you've heard in Indian country?
Yes. I do know that Indian country, their trust in the Postal Service and the trust of actually having their ballot, if it's sent by mail, is at an all-time low, and that they would prefer to see that ballot that they marked, that they put it in the ballot box and they know it's there and will be counted. So we also have a trust issue. I mean, after all of these hundreds of years, I don't see why we trust so much.
Yeah, I think the word "duh" fits in there real well. We've kind of been curious about any other support for Native voting rights, or anything from any of the national Indian organizations, or perhaps any of the candidates. Have you heard anything that sounded encouraging to you?
Well, we're also part, it's called the Native American Voting Rights Coalition, which is tribal organizations throughout the United States that looks specifically at voting issues. we have helped create legislation sent to Congress on trying to ease the barriers that natives face. Unfortunately, it hasn't gone anywhere, and I doubt if it will go anywhere, but we do have people in organizations cooperating together to try to get legislation that would help make it easier, or I shouldn't say easier, make it possible for natives to participate.
We just witnessed the nomination of the Democratic Party's candidacy, their choices to run for president and vice president. And usually along with that, and I presume somewhere along this week, there is a plank in the Democratic platform that deals with Native American issues. Has any of that come up? Are you aware of any discussions like that?
I do know that both parties are putting a chair at the table for Native Americans because of how active we've been. One of the things I'd like to point out is that Four Directions was the organization that put together the two presidential forums, one in Iowa and one in Las Vegas prior COVID. And both the presidential and vice presidential nominations appeared at those forums and talked to tribal leaders, tribal organizations, and tribal members about issues important to Indian country. So, I do know that they are aware of our issues. I know after the forum that they actually created better Indian policies to work with tribes because they understood what we were dealing with a lot better once they were able to talk to our tribal leaders and our tribal members.
Right. Having a Native person at the table makes quite a difference. Mr. Siemens, if anyone was interested in contacting you or wanted more information about this National Voting Rights group, how would they get in touch with you?
They can go to our website. It's called fourdirectionsvote.com. And we have basically all our contact information in there. We have our case studies. We've assisted and did investigations for federal lawsuits in South Dakota, North Dakota, Montana, Nevada, Arizona. We've helped tribes in Minnesota set up satellite offices. Our whole goal is to empower the tribes and the tribal members. And so all they have to do is go to that website, fourdirectionsvote.com.
All right, and O.J. Siemens, thank you so much for taking some time to chat with me about this issue, particularly on short notice. So I want to say, okay, well, we'll keep our eye on it, of course, as the elections progress, and who knows, we may want to chat with you again.
Not a problem, Gary. Anytime, just give a holler.
Okay.
Thanks.
That was O.J. Siemens for Directions. We're going to take a very short pause, and then we'll come back with the excerpts from the Law and Order discussion roundtable that went on in Tulsa very recently regarding what they're going to do after the McGirt decision. Please stay with us here on Mvskoke Radio, here on The Brew.
Who am I? Am I Indian? Just 'cause I'm a girl from the res, don't make things up about me. What if I move away? Then who am I? Some kids try meth just to escape, but then I think about my grandma, my little brother, my beadwork, my poetry, and I think, I like who I am, and I know meth is not for me.
Check out ncai.org, a message from the Partnership for a Drug-Free America and the National Congress of American Indians.
Next, we'll be sharing some of the highlights.
With phone calls and questions and inquiries from members of the media, from a lot of folks in this room, but also from members of the public. And we wanted to sit down today together, not just to show a unified front and a singular voice, but to champion our common mission, which is public safety. Public safety to all of the communities that we serve here in northeastern Oklahoma. But in particular, you can see I have Tulsa County District Attorney Steve Koonsweiler here to my right. how are our offices working together now as we try to figure out who is prosecuting what in the post-McGirt world. Kyle Haskins, an Assistant Attorney General with the Mvskoke Creek Nation. How is it that the United States Attorney's Office is receiving cases and then working with the tribe to determine which ones they may prosecute versus which ones we may? And then, of course, Deputy Chief Eric Daglish from the Tulsa Police Department. The men and women of TPD are out in the front lines right now, and whether it's a traffic stop responding to a domestic violence call or one of the 10 homicides that we've had since the McGirt decision, TPD is having to make these calls on the ground and make these decisions on the ground. So let me first say that the U.S. Attorney's Office right now continues to be staffed at the same levels that it was before the McGirt decision. And the reason that is significant is that our prosecution responsibilities have increased substantially. Just last week, a federal grand jury heard evidence and determined that there was probable cause to return more than 50 indictments. That's a record for the Northern District of Oklahoma, and a number of those cases are cases that, but for the McGirt decision, would have been in District Attorney Kunzweiler's office. About 3.5 weeks ago, the state of Oklahoma lost the ability to prosecute cases that occur on the Mvskoke Creek Nation Indian Reservation that involve an Indian defendant or an Indian victim. The fact that we can pick up the phone and call one another, and we do on a regular basis, are really helping to ensure that the communities that we've all taken oaths to serve continue to receive excellent public safety services. With that, I want to ask District Attorney Kunzweiler to make a couple of remarks, in particular about some of the changes in his office, as well as they've seen cases that they normally would prosecute come over to the U.S. Attorney's Office. And then I'm going to ask Assistant Attorney General Haskins to make a few remarks as well.
Is this an issue? Yes. Does it affect how things get handled? Yes. Is it going to change how law enforcement is going to deal with the lawbreaker? No. We're going to make sure that justice is served.
And I'm going to ask Assistant Attorney General Haskins to jump in real quick, and then we'll ask Deputy Chief to provide that law enforcement perspective.
I'll keep this very brief. In all of your packets, there was a written statement that I prepared yesterday on behalf of the nation. I want all of you to know that it's an honor to be here. It's an honor to be part of a group who is working so hard to make sure that we do the right thing by all the citizens of the state of Oklahoma. I will tell you that Chief Hill and Second Chief Beaver, they are good and honorable men. They're giving us every opportunity to make sure that we do the right things. No one has more of an interest in law and order throughout the Mvskoke Creek Nation, throughout these historical reservation boundaries, than the Mvskoke Creek Nation. Again, thank you for letting me be here. I wanted to keep it very brief, and certainly any questions that you all have we'll address. But it's a good day, and it's a good opportunity to make sure that we are doing the right things as is provided for by federal law. Thank you. Chief?
I will say up front, and I think Trent alluded to this, it is something that for law enforcement we are learning more about every day. We woke up and came to work one day and protocols and systems had changed dramatically. So since that day we have been in the process of making sure our officers have the guidance and the information needed to make decisions correctly on the front end so that we can limit the amount of work that has to be done on the back end to decide jurisdictional issues or who will prosecute, etc. What the scope of our officers' authority is, and all of those questions we want to provide for our officers up front. And to Trent's point, if this occurred today, during the day, we could probably get answers fairly quickly. If this occurred at 2 or 3 in the morning for a young officer, resources are a little more limited. So we want to make sure they have those answers. I want to stress that when I talk about processes and protocols changing, nothing has changed in terms of citizens dialing 911. If they call 911 and they ask for an officer to come, we are coming. We are not screening on the front end of our phone calls, asking questions about nationality or Indian status. We're sending an officer there to handle that call, and they will make those decisions and those determinations once they show up. But the important thing is to get an officer where they're needed immediately, and that is still occurring. So other than that, I'll do my very best to answer questions, and if I don't know the answer to something, I'm going to tell you that up front. So appreciate the opportunity to be here.
Before we jump into Q&A, I want to provide a couple of updates on some items that, as my colleagues spoke, I was reminded of. And first, this is a very fluid situation. In fact, there was a discussion among us whether or not even having a press conference today was too early, because we're still learning so much on a day-to-day basis about how we interact now with one another and who to call when incidents occur. Just a few weeks ago, we had an officer who encountered a woman during a traffic stop who claimed to be Native American. She said, "I'm a member of the Seneca Cayuga Nation." It was here on the Mvskoke Creek Reservation, and the officer had to figure out, what is it that I'm supposed to do? Do I have jurisdiction? Do I have authority over this individual? Well, the Seneca Cayuga membership office wasn't open at 2 a.m. She didn't have any type of identification that showed that she was a tribal member, not a citizenship card from the nation, not a certified degree of Indian blood CDIB card from the Department of the Interior. And so that officer called one of our prosecutors and was advised, follow through, do your job, follow through with public safety. And she was taken into custody for the incident that occurred, and turns out the next day when they went back to look to make sure they had not improperly placed somebody under detention, she wasn't telling the truth. She was not, in fact, a Native American citizen. And that's something right now that the officers on the streets are seeing and hearing quite a bit, I'm told anecdotally. And so, sure, it's no surprise to anyone that folks sometimes lie when they get pulled over, maybe about where they were going or how fast they were traveling or they thought they were traveling. But now our officers are hearing a lot, I'm Indian, because people think it's a get-out-of-jail-free card all of a sudden, and that's not at all what it is.
U.S. Attorney Shores talked about this idea that people lie when they're being pulled over or contacted. So to the extent that you're in that population, shame on you. Shame on you for somehow trying to pretend to be somebody that you're not. You know, at the end of the day, what you're doing is you're only affecting your credibility. If you're going to tell a law enforcement officer to try and get yourself out of trouble, that you're a member of a federally recognized tribe and you're not entitled to that membership, you just lied to a law enforcement officer. You're obstructing that officer in his or her performance of their duties, and that's going to be an additional crime you may have to face consequences for. But at the end of the day, it affects your credibility. If you cross the line, take responsibility for crossing a line and let your attorney deal with it. But don't get into this business of trying to somehow put this image that a Native American tribal member who's law-abiding, now you're going to put yourself in that group to try and claim that you're a member of that tribe just so you can somehow try and escape justice. Shame on you for doing that.
A question for Mr. Shores and Mr. Kurzweiler. One of the fears that was discussed in the court case was that there would be a flood of cases coming to you, people claiming membership, and that you would be overwhelmed by that particular flood. Now, first of all, how would you describe the numbers of cases coming to you? And do you think you have the adequate staff to deal with it?
That's a great question, and I actually like the word flood. I've been using the word tidal wave. The decision, if I recall, came out on or about July 9th. Since then, since the McGirt decision, my office has been referred 113 cases as of today. Of those 113 cases, I think we've capped or been able to retain around 60 of them, and we have referred the majority of the rest of those to the Mvskoke Creek Nation for their review of prosecution and consideration for prosecution. There is no better team ready to handle that workload than my team that I have here in the U.S. Attorney's Office. They are hard chargers, and they are working around the clock right now. My question is how much longer can we continue to work at this pace? And I can tell you, they're going to go until they drop. And I think we have reinforcements on the way, like I said, from across the country. So the number of cases has been extraordinary. The number of indictments that were returned this month reflect that. Tulsa County has Judge Pretty at Tulsa County has a McGirt docket that she convenes twice a month. And at that docket, cases are identified that need to be dismissed because of the change in jurisdictional status. It's my understanding that last week at that docket, 47 cases were dismissed. It's my understanding that at the docket that is coming up at the end of this month, there may be as many as 85 cases that could be dismissed. So we're watching that really closely here, because when those cases are dismissed, there's a good chance they're coming over here. And if any of those defendants are violent offenders, then we want to be prepared to seamlessly take on that case to ensure that victims are protected and that our community at large is protected. So it's a lot of work. We're standing up and we're taking it on our shoulders right now, and I can't tell you how proud I am of our team, but we're also looking forward to reinforcements coming in the form of details.
My wife, if I could address something, my wife asked that I address this issue of who's an Indian in Oklahoma. So many of us have Native American ancestral backgrounds, but unless your ancestors registered under the Dawes Act, you are not eligible for membership in a federally recognized Indian tribe. I am actually Cherokee. In years past, and some of my involvement with the Cherokee Nation, I've met full-blooded Cherokees. They're as dark-complected as any human that you would meet, black hair, very dark eyes. Their first language is Cherokee, very traditional Cherokees, and they are not members of a federally recognized Indian tribe because their ancestors did not register under the Dawes Act. Tribes to get to control who their membership are. So, I would encourage those of us who are tribal members. Tribes issue membership cards. And with the Cherokee Nation, it's a blue card, and I carry my blue card with me pretty much everywhere I go, and it's a matter of pride. But every tribe has their own membership cards. CDIB cards, most of the time, a tribe will assist their members in getting a CDIB card from the Bureau of Indian Affairs, Department of Interior. It's a little cream card that has a buffalo and a seal. But that card in and of itself does not establish that you are only that tribal membership card. We were discussing before we came in, many years ago when I was on the bench, I had an individual who had what appeared to be a tribal tag on the back of his car. It was a separatist group that created a tag to look like a Native American tribe. And that was a long experience in my life, but nonetheless, you cannot rely upon appearance, you cannot rely upon name, you cannot rely upon whether someone's driving a car with a tribal tag. Maybe it's a spouse's car with their tribal tag. So, I do encourage those who are members of a federally recognized Indian tribe to carry your tribal membership cards with you. At the Mvskoke Creek Nation, we are seeing cases that are coming to us to where after doing our due diligence, we're finding out that these people are not members of a federally recognized Indian tribe, and in fact, they belong in the state court system. So we're working through these processes to not only take the cases that should come to us and which belong with us, but making sure that those cases go back. So we're filling those gaps to make sure that all of us are protected in Oklahoma.
Cherokee.
Deputy Chief Dalgish, what are you telling your officers, your boots on the ground officers, and how to handle these kinds of cases? Is there a policy in place? And secondly, do they hear a lot of grandma was a Cherokee princess kind of thing?
Yes, similar to what they're describing, our legal advisor immediately put together a document, a guidance document, which has been revised 3 or 4 times as more questions came in. But that has been distributed to all the officers. It includes a matrix or a flow chart asking, ask this question, this question. It talks about geography. Are you south of Admiral? Are you north of Admiral? If then this, then this. So it is a challenge for the officers to work through it, but they do have the information with them. We don't have a written policy that addresses it in our policy and procedure manual. It's been just weeks since it went into effect, but we do have a guidance document that contains those emails, those phone numbers that they can access. And anecdotally, yes, we have seen side of the road claims of tribal membership, and I think that's been addressed. The officer does their very best to determine if that's valid, and that will include phone calls, requests for ID, and if they exhaust means to identify or prove tribal membership, then they would continue on as if they were not members of a tribe, and then it would be determined after the fact in the court system.
The Mvskoke Creek Nation has a judicial system, a court system that's 50 years older than the state of Oklahoma. We have 3 full-time prosecutors at this time. Roger Wiley, our Attorney General, has given us permission. We're going to hire 3 more, so we'll have 6 prosecutors. I haven't told Mr. Shores this, but I'm in the process of applying to be a Special Assistant United States Attorney myself to try to help out with the issues that are coming this direction. It'd be my honor to do so. I do want to let you know everybody is responding to what's going on. It was really impossible to anticipate what the United States Supreme Court was going to do. So we are responding. We're responding as quickly as possible. We've now added a 3rd judge in our tribal courts. We have a Supreme Court, and everything's going to be fine. We just need time to get our feet underneath us.
Mr. Haskins, has the load in for your judicial system really changed? You mentioned an increase in, of course, more responsibility. Is it overwhelming? Is it something that your team can handle? How is the Mvskoke Creek Nation adjusting other?
Actually, I would say, with regard to the sovereignty that the nation is exercising, it's an honor. But we're able to do it. We're able to deal with it. We have 11 attorneys. I handle predominantly civil litigation issues in our office, but Mr. Riley has announced to everyone in our office we are all prosecutors now when need be, and that's fine and it is appropriate. But yes, we can handle it. Our court system is prepared for it. If we need to build and expand, whether it's courtrooms or more personnel, we'll do so.
Would any of those laws and statutes include usage of the Violence Against Women Act, VAWA?
Absolutely. We do a lot of prosecutions under VAWA. Native American women are victims of domestic violence at rates, I think, higher than any other demographic in the United States. It's a particularly tragic and tough affliction on a lot of reservations throughout the country. And oftentimes, we see that Native American women don't have access to the same types of resources that somebody in an urban area might. And by that I mean like a women's shelter or counseling services or just a safe place to go because they're isolated and they're in a more rural area. The Mvskoke Creek Nation is actually a great example on this topic. They have a wonderful family violence program that really is robust and does a great job of meeting the needs of the victims. So we, for a number of years, have aggressively prosecuted domestic violence-related crimes under the Violence Against Women Act And that includes prosecution of both Native Americans and non-Native Americans that cause or inflict abuse on spouses, intimate partners, or family members. And that's something that we will continue to do. I'm actually a member of Attorney General Barr's Domestic Violence Working Group. It's a specific group he set up to address domestic violence. We see that not just in Indian country, but throughout the country. And it parallels with the gun prosecutions that we have. We know when there's a firearm in a house where there's a domestic abuser, that the likelihood that that firearm is used is 500 times more. And that's a pretty scary statistic if you think about it. And our goal ultimately in those cases is to ensure that bruises don't turn into bullets. And we will continue to aggressively pursue those cases. One of the things we've done is establish a new leadership position in my office, a deputy criminal chief for Indian country. That individual, the individual that's selected for that, her name is Shannon Kazoni. AUSA Kazoni, or now Deputy Chief Kazoni, actually used to be the first Assistant Attorney General at the Mvskoke Creek Nation. She is not only intimately familiar with Indian country, but she's prosecuted a number of those domestic violence prosecutions, and recognizing that that was going to be a particular focus and need for us as we move forward, and we've certainly already seen that. Her leadership and ability to help mentor other prosecutors who maybe haven't done those cases in a while, I think is going to be really crucial as we move forward.
Mr. Haskins, your response to the question of VAWA, has our system, the Mvskoke Creek District Court system, used that as a tool?
Absolutely. We have prosecuted non-Indians for violence upon women. I was thinking about your earlier question, and it kind of led me down the path of sovereignty. One of the things that has come up through this process, I spent my last 7 years on the bench dealing with deprived kids and high-risk delinquents. It's given the Mvskoke Creek Nation the opportunity to maybe try to find different ways in dealing with some of these issues that might lead to better outcome for Indian kids that live within our jurisdictions.
What we're trying to do here is understand the relationship between our own Mvskoke Nation and the second largest city in Oklahoma, Tulsa. So far, we've heard that the relationship has worked out fairly well, and that things are progressing. But I can't see that such a thing wouldn't go forward without some challenges. So, what is the job you still have left to do in working that out?
Well, the hardest thing has been continuity, is getting everybody to remain or to respond the same in the different jurisdictions, in the different municipalities or different counties. So that's been the first hurdle for us to get through, because not everyone is responding the same. And it's not for me to give legal advice to any other law enforcement agency. It's just to deal with our own. Here in Tulsa, we have cross-deputization agreements, and there actually are two kinds of cross-deputization agreements. One enables tribal law enforcement and local law enforcement to enforce each other's laws. So our light horse can deal with non-Indians, and TPD can deal with Indians. And there's another cross-dep agreement that's in place that's approved by BIA that allows local law enforcement to enforce federal laws. So actually our law enforcement here at TPD will have two different cards. One is a commission by the Mvskoke Creek Nation Light Horse, and the other is a commission by the Bureau of Indian Affairs.
Okay, one of the questions we ask out of our curiosity said, do we have the crew to handle the job? That includes, of course, the district court and those folks, but also light horse. Do we have enough officers then to respond to what is kind of a more complicated situation?
We just, I know that Light Horse requested some additional funding from National Council. It was approved. The number was somewhere around $2.5 million to be able to add additional Light Horse officers. I think the intent is to add about 30 more. I wish that Chief Wind was here. He's got COVID, so he'd been able to answer that question more specifically as to what his plans are. But yes, we are doing everything that's necessary to be able to step up. My only real regret right now is trying to make sure that we have all area law enforcement agencies sharing cross-step agreements, because what will happen is if there is no cross-step agreement, and a local law enforcement officer pulls over an American Indian, and it turns out that it's a federal offense, they literally can't do anything except for dispatch out for the FBI to respond or whatever appropriate law enforcement agency. So you've got to call someone else in to come in and be able to respond to that offense. So some of that's the salesmanship that you were talking about, is trying to convince everybody to move in the same direction, have the same responses. One of the things that I have asked all the law enforcement agencies I've been dealing with is, in the event that there's an issue about someone's Indianness, as to whether they are a member of a federally recognized Indian tribe, deal with them as a non-Indian, go through your normal processes and procedures. The burden is upon that person to prove that they're a member of a federally recognized Indian tribe. Where we're running into difficulties are, just as Trent was saying, individuals holding themselves out as Native Americans, and they're just simply not. They're lying, or they're carrying identification around with them that is counterfeit or stolen. None of that should surprise anyone. So, the new defense du jour is claiming you're an Indian in all courts to try to avoid any repercussions or consequences for your actions.
One of the things I think that maybe was not discussed is people in Oklahoma, a lot of them do have Indian blood and some part of an ancestry, but not necessarily membership. Huge difference there. So if someone says, the Cherokee Princess thing, and so that should get me out, what does the Mvskoke Creek Nation do? How do you respond?
Lighthorse has immediate access to our database to determine our citizenship. Each tribe, they're very protective of their citizenship, so we can't access anyone else's information. I know the Cherokee Nation, has a huge citizenship. They're very easy to access and get their information. So for the officer that's on the street, if they're Creek or if they're Cherokee, those things can be established very quickly. But remember, this is about any member of any Indian tribe that might be in the state of Oklahoma at the time that an offense is created. So they may be from Arizona, they may be from South Dakota, or anywhere else in the country, but have committed an offense in the state of Oklahoma. So they are still subject to the Murphy-McGirt analysis.
Gary Fife with Mvskoke Media.
Yes.
You've got a huge challenge ahead of you. You've got second largest city in Oklahoma and fourth largest tribe in the country. What do you see as the challenges now that are facing you?
Well, I'll start where I finished in my comments, which is, there's a lot of complicated issues that are out there. I'm mostly concerned about how victims are going to be dealt with. I'm very worried about children's cases, delinquent, deprived cases. I'm very worried about, this concept that we have to deal with people who have highly addictive issues. Oklahoma has learned that it's very expensive to run a penal system. And I would imagine the Mvskoke Creek Nation has to be thinking of that too, there's obviously there are expenses associated with all these programs. And so as we've been trying to divert off those folks who, I always say that there are people that you're frightened of, murderers, rapists, robbers, those kind of folks. And then there's those people that you're angry at, the people that keep on ringing the bell, right? They're going into a retail establishment, stealing things. They're committing drug or alcohol-related offenses, and you know what's going on. They're addicted. And you need to figure out, how do I keep them from getting into the penal system, as in being sentenced to prison, and can I put together some kind of alternative to incarceration program? Well, that takes time and money and resources. And so we've got a very well-established program, obviously, if you watch it on the news. And we do really well with women in recovery and men's first step program. We got the drug court, DUI court, mental health court, veterans treatment court, mental health court, all those programs. Those are the things that I'm hopeful that any other prosecution authority will be trying to figure out, all right, well, how can we handle these particular issues and doing it in a way that brings justice to the public so that they're assured that people aren't reoffending, and then to hopefully rehabilitate those people who've been injured, whether it's something from their past in a juvenile case or whether it's something that's just, they just don't know how to deal with their addiction.
Pick it up there. We were interested, of course, in what happens down on Tulsa streets. You've got situations there. We've heard of a number of cases coming out of course, prison, people wanting to make a new trial and things like that. Is there any sort of similar situation that your department and officers are experiencing? People, yelling, "I'm an Indian, you can't do anything," that sort of thing?
Yeah, we've seen, just anecdotally, I wouldn't have hard numbers for you. I've heard the stories of officers encountering individuals that are claiming tribal citizenship. And, of course, our officers are being trained now to ask specific questions once they arrive so that we can get those jurisdictional issues addressed immediately rather than once we're an hour into an incident determining that the victim or the suspect is an Indian and having to reroute to another direction. But once those questions are answered, then we can designate appropriately where the case needs to go. In terms of confirming it, the officer, a part of their training now is to ask those questions, would be asking for a citizenship card. If that's unavailable, it would be calling the membership offices and trying to confirm, and they've been very responsive in that regard, so that's been a great help. But if they have exhausted all resources in trying to determine citizenship, then they would proceed as if Indian status was not an issue, and then we would rely on the court system to determine if it needs to be rerouted to either the Creek Nation or the federal government.
Mr. Shore, I'll try and be quick here. Excuse me. The legal structure is now in place completely, pretty much. First of all, is that the case?
When you say legal structure, I'm sorry, please tell me what you mean.
The law, the decision from the Supreme Court regarding McGirt, jurisdictional question has been answered to this point. What does that mean for your office now? Where do you go from here?
I see. Yes, the Supreme Court's decision in McGirt is final. The mandate has issued, and frankly, since the decision came down, the United States has been acting in its regard as the primary prosecutor for cases that involve Indian defendants or Indian victims. Since the McGirt decision, the state lost its ability to prosecute Indian defendants or non-Indians that committed crimes against Indian victims that occurred here in the Mvskoke Creek Nation Reservation, where we are today.
Okay, as the implementation of this decision is now going forward, we're seeing a number of cases now that are being asked to be reviewed, and I presume that's going to really draw heavily on federal resources. So what's the task there? Do you need to add? Do you need to get in there and spend a lot of midnight hours burning candle? Where do you go?
Well, there has been a tsunami of cases that have come our way, and my team is stepping up with the resources we have in place to work 24/7. They're working weekends, they're working evenings to make sure that we not only uphold our trust responsibility to the Mvskoke Creek Nation, but to all the citizens here in Northern District of Oklahoma. The next step is hopefully that we'll have volunteers from other U.S. attorneys' offices across the country that can come in and can volunteer to prosecute cases here to help us bridge the gap, so to speak, until more permanent resources can be put in place in the form of federal prosecutors and legal support staff and victim witness coordinators that will be here on a permanent and ongoing basis.
Of course, we'll continue to follow that situation as it develops and bring you any more news that has come up. Now, we have to get out of here. We want to remind you that the Mvskoke Nation Festival 2020 has been canceled for this year. We're sorry to hear that, but they did it out of a concern for public safety. All right, now, I guess it is time for us to get on. We will be back next week with more Mvskoke Radio. Please, Gary Fife, Jawajifkados. Mado Mabo Hejitsket. You've been listening to Mvskoke Radio. Join us again next week for more local, tribal, and community news and updates. Mado.